Okay, everyone, welcome back from lunch. Hope it was good. We're going to start off with a session called Building Excellent Web Experiences with Advanced Custom Fields and Visual Composer by Stanislav. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here. So the talk is called Building Excellent Web Experiences with Advanced Custom Fields and Visual Composer. A little bit about me. My name is Stanislav Khromov. I am a web developer at IDG Sweden. We are a large publishing house. We make magazines, basically. And I work with a wide array of technologies, not only WordPress, but also Drupal, InVision PowerBoard, and much more. But I really like WordPress and its ecosystem because it lets us quickly execute on ideas that we have. So we might just have one day have an idea for a new project, and thanks to the simplicity of WordPress development, we can have it ready very quickly. But there are still things that I think we can do to increase our speed even more, to make site building even faster. So what we're going to look at in this talk is we're going to try to find a good workflow for working with custom post types, for working with custom fields, and for working with any custom shortcodes that we build. And then we're also going to take a look at how we can provide a good experience for content publishers, I mean the people who are actually going to be using your site. And at the end we're going to have a little case study where we're going to look at some new sites that we built at IDG that are event sites, basically. Okay. And like this method that we're going to show, it's by no means like the best method or anything. In fact, you probably already have methods for dealing with custom post types and, and custom fields, but I hope you can still get something out of this talk. So let's talk a little bit about the core technologies we're going to be using. So we're going to be using post types, and I guess since this is the developer track, most of you know what a post type is. But just as a quick brush up, WordPress comes with three built-in post types: post, page, and media. And then you can also create additional post types, and you usually do that when you want to model some kind of content that doesn't fit into the post, page, or media category. So maybe if you're building a site for a library, you may have to build a custom post type called book. It's a typical example. And custom fields are basically some types of values that we can attach onto post types. So like a typical custom field for a book would maybe be the author or the year the book was published. And shortcodes. A shortcode is like a special token, which is usually enclosed in brackets, that once the page is shown, that token is exchanged for some sort of dynamic information. And there are a few built-in shortcodes in WordPress. Maybe the most famous one is the gallery shortcode. And something I also want to point out is that shortcodes can take arguments. So in this case, we have the same shortcode, but we have an argument called IDs, where we have inserted 3 IDs. So this will show a gallery with the 3 images that have those 3 IDs. So these are the core features that we're going to be using. And then we have some plugins that we're going to be using. We're going to be using a plugin called Custom Post Type UI, which lets us basically create custom post types very easily by, instead of having to put it in code and having to code it, we have like a really nice interface for creating custom post type. We're going to be using advanced custom fields, which augments the functionality of standard core WordPress custom fields, and it lets you not only do like simple text that you can attach onto a post, and it lets you do stuff like drop downs, checkboxes, color pickers, maps. Like there's a lot of different types of custom fields that we can attach onto our posts thanks to the advanced custom fields plugin. We're going to also use a plugin called MinQ, which is used for minification and concatenation of CSS and JavaScript, but we're going to get to that later. And finally, we're going to use Visual Composer, which it's a drag and drop page builder, and what it essentially does is that it simplifies how a content creator would build a site, and we're going to look at how we can use these kind of drag and drop page builders to provide greater flexibility for the end user. Okay, so let's take a look at custom post types. So what do we want when we are setting up? So we're just setting up a new site and we want to build some custom post types, and like kind of what do we want? What kind of stuff would be nice to have? Well, we'd like to have a visual interface for creating a custom post type. And that's what the custom post types UI plugin will allow us. Now, the bad part about that is that all these plugins that do stuff visually, they store their configuration in the WordPress database. And that's not very good because, well, you can't put it in version control and you can't really keep track of, you know, if one of your developers changes something, you don't necessarily know that unless you dump their database over to yours. It's very difficult to work that way. So we set up a point here, no configuration in the database. That's bad. And then as a final point, we want to separate different custom post types into different files, because we don't want to have just like a file and then it's like 6,000 rows of different post types and shortcodes and like whatever, everything just jumbled in together. It's not very good. It makes it very hard to find what we're looking for. And I would also like to have some sort of quick, like auto loading, like we don't have to think about including files and like hooking and stuff like that. We want it to be simple. So here's just an example of using custom post types UI, the first plugin we mentioned, for creating a custom post type. Here we're creating a post type for books. So this is basically it. Then you just fill in the fields and you click the Create Custom Post Type button at the end. There's also an advanced options, which is really good. That's really like what makes these plugins very powerful is that, especially if you maybe haven't registered post types that often and you don't really know like what is available, like what kind of flags can I set, what kind of options can I set. Like these plugins lay it out for you so that you don't have to go into the codex and look for that specific parameter that does this and how does it work. These plugins take care of that for you. But we're not going to go too deep into like the creation itself because it's pretty straightforward. We're still going to look at how we can structure this in a good way. So, custom post types UI lets us export our custom fields, our custom post types into code. That's great. So that means that we don't have to have it in the database. But we have our code now. Where should we put this code? And how should we organize it? Should we put it in the theme? In fact, like even if you read, it says place the below code in your themes functions.php file. And sure, we could do that. It'll work. But it's not optimal really. Like what if we change themes? Like that means that all of our custom post types will disappear. I mean, the data will still be there, but it doesn't seem like a good idea to tie like this sort of logical database configuration into a theme. So why not use a plugin instead? Because plugins, you can take them with you, they're portable, you can take them from one site to the next and have the same features. And if you change the theme, like your custom post types will still be there. So let's look at a little plugin for managing custom post types. So you can see the basic folder structure there on the bottom. Right now we're in the WP content -plugins folder. So this is basically, we've created a little plugin, which we're calling custom CPT. And inside that we have a folder, which is called CPT. And you can see it has two files in it. It has author and book, and these are two custom post types that we have created. So we've made them in the custom post types UI in the plugin visually, and then we have exported their code and basically just pasted them into those two files. So now we have everything here. All we need to do is basically include these files automatically so that when WordPress loads, we register our custom post types. So let's look at the very last file, which is called custom-cpt.php, which is our actual plugin. And it looks like this. It's like literally 3 rows of code. All it does is first we have, like, of course, the plugin, standard plugin header without the header, which is like the commented out block at the top. Without it, WordPress won't actually recognize this as a plugin. And then we have the very first row of logic. We have an add action, so we're hooking into plugins loaded. And then we're essentially using a closure here, also called an anonymous function. I know has anyone used anonymous functions? Yes, some have. Well, essentially, I mean, most of you have probably made a hook, and like what this does is let you, instead of having a separate function with the stuff you want to do at that hook, you just define the function right where you would put the function name otherwise. So this is a PHP 5.3 or up feature. But it's nice because then you don't have to like define a bunch of functions, and you can do everything in just like in one swoop. And then once we go past that, what we do on the plugin loaded hook is that we basically iterate over the CPT directory that we have and look for PHP files. And for every PHP file, we include it. So this is like an extremely bare bones autoloader. So whenever we put new files in the CPT folder, so maybe we have another post type that we want to add, we just create the PHP file in the CPT folder, insert the code to register the custom post type, and it will automatically be loaded into your installation. There is a little problem though. Now, if we just employ this plugin, post types will be loaded twice. So first we have created them in custom post types UI, the plugin, so they're in the database and they get loaded every time. But then we've also exported them and put them into our plugin, so they're loaded twice now, and that's not optimal. And the solution is that we introduce a little tiny WP config flag, which basically lets us say that we are in development mode. So we have a variable here called custom CPT development mode, which we set to true. So in your local development environment, you would set this to true, but when you deploy to like the live server, you would set this to false. And then we change the plugin a little bit. So this is the same plugin as we looked at before, which loads the custom post types. But now it only loads them if we're not in development mode. So basically what this lets us do is it lets us develop, and then once we've like developed everything locally and visually, we can export it to a PHP file, and then suddenly like all this custom post type configuration is now in code, and then we can deploy it to our live site. And this is kind of like the thought process behind it. You create your custom post type, you configure it, and like once you've reconfigured it, you export it, just like we did, and then you commit it to your version control. And maybe you're using some version, maybe you're using GitHub, it doesn't really matter. But version control is important. So what did we accomplish by doing that? Well, we did get to use a visual interface for creating our custom post types. We don't have any configuration in the database anymore. We have them in files, so we can version them. We have separated the custom post type configuration into different files so that they're easy to find. And we auto-load them. So like whenever we add the new custom post type, there's no friction. We just create the file, put in the code, and we're done. So I think that's a good workflow for working with custom post types. So let's move on to custom fields. What do we want to do with custom fields then? Well, it's kind of similar to what we want to do with custom post types. We want to have a visual interface for creating fields and setting them up. We don't want any configuration in the database. We'd like to separate field configurations. We don't want to have like all of our custom fields in one single file where it's really hard to find stuff. And we also want to auto-load everything. So this is an example when using advanced custom fields. Has anyone used advanced custom fields before? Most of you have. So you know approximately how it works. Basically what it lets you do is it lets you define custom fields. So here we have, we're creating author fields, and I've created 2 author fields, a first name and a last name, as you can see. I don't have my mouse, sorry. And then a little bit further down in the location rules, I've set that these 2 fields should appear on post type is equal to author. And so basically what advanced custom fields lets us do is we can both create custom fields, but we can also group them logically into groups. In this case, the group is author fields. And advanced custom fields lets us export stuff into PHP code, which is great. And again, it tells you put the code in your functions.php file of your theme, and we don't want to do that because again, we don't want to keep stuff like this in our theme. So we need to make a new plugin. And this plugin is very similar to the old one. Instead, we have, the plugin is called Custom Fields, and we have a folder called Field Groups instead of a folder called CPT. And inside the Field Groups folder, we have the author fields and the book fields that we create in Advanced Custom Fields and that we export. And then we have the plugin itself, which you can also see at the bottom. And it looks like exactly the same as the previous one, but all it does is take files from the Field Groups folder and includes them so that they're available. So it's the same basic idea. And the thought process is also the same. So you create your field groups, you create your fields, you configure them, you may be reconfiguring them, and then you export them to your PHP file when you're finished, and then you commit it to version control so that you can actually keep track of any changes you make. Again, we got to use the visual interface for creating fields. That is advanced custom fields. We don't have any configuration in the database. We have separated field configuration into logical groups, so the advanced custom fields groups. And we have auto loading so that it's very easy to add new groups should we need to. Let's move on to shortcodes. So shortcodes, the basic idea is the same, but shortcodes are a little bit more advanced than just custom post types and custom fields. Shortcodes can have dependencies. So maybe you want to style your shortcode maybe you're making a shortcode for buttons or something, and you want to include styles with that shortcode. Maybe you have like some JavaScript that isn't required to get the shortcode to run. Maybe it has some interactivity. Maybe it's like a tab interface or something. Maybe your shortcode uses some custom PHP libraries for some functionality, and maybe it has some strings in it, so you have to internationalize it. So the requirements are a little different, but perhaps we can build on the same base that we already set up to create shortcodes that you can then use as portable little tiny packages. Yeah, so again, the typical shortcode might consist of like the main shortcode logic, which is the actual shortcode, any templates that it uses for common parts, external resources, CSS, regular, and maybe even responsive CSS if there's some responsive elements, JavaScript, images, and dependencies, which are PHP libraries. Thinking about all that, we make a new plugin. And this looks a little scary. There's a lot of files. So we're going to break it down and talk a little bit about what the structure looks like. So we have the top folder, which is called custom shortcodes. Again, we're in the WP content plugins folder, so we're making a plugin essentially. We have inside our custom shortcodes folder, we have an includes folder, which lets us put in any libraries that we'd like to include. So, for example, here we include a PHP file that sets some image sizes for us to work with the shortcodes. And we have the MinQ support file. We're going to talk about MinQ a little bit later. And then we have the translations. We have any extra resources, images, etc. And then we have our shortcodes directory. So shortcodes consist of CSS, which is the red box. We have JavaScript. You have any shared templates in the yellow box, and then we have the actual shortcode logic in the orange box. So as you can see we kind of have a naming convention going on. So the shortcodes themselves are show_authors and show_books. And like the CSS files, they have the same names, so they're easy to find. And the same goes for the JavaScript. So it's not an imposed naming convention, but we do this so that it's easy to know which CSS and JavaScript belong to which shortcode. All right, so we were going to go through like a typical shortcode, but I think we don't really have time for that. So we'll just jump to the next section. But this is just like a regular shortcode. If you're building shortcodes today, you don't have to build them differently. You build them the same way. This is just an example of what a shortcode kind of looks like. And this is what like the CSS would look like for our shortcode. So basically we in this case, for our shortcodes, show authors, we have the div, which is called author list, which the shortcode will print, and the associated CSS will have a rule for that class so that we can theme our specific shortcodes. So how does it work? Well, there's just a bunch of autoloaders for all of this. So we load libraries from the includes folder on the plugins loaded hook. We load shortcodes from the shortcodes folder on after setup theme. And we load CSS and JavaScript on WP enqueue scripts. And this is again very nice because when we want to create a new shortcode, we don't actually have to like enqueue stuff. We just drop like a CSS file in the CSS folder. We drop a JavaScript file in the JavaScript folder. And we drop in our shortcode as a PHP file, and like everything gets included automatically. So it simplifies the creation of shortcodes. So what did we accomplish? Well, we've separated shortcodes into portable packages, which is their CSS, JavaScript, the shortcode itself, plus any libraries. We've handled dependencies. We have made internationalization possible for shortcodes, and everything gets auto-loaded. But won't somebody please think of the performance? You think, what if I have like 50 shortcodes? Like, well, what will happen then? Because I mean, every shortcode theoretically has a CSS file associated with it, which is like an additional 50 CSS files that you have to print out to your page. But it's not a problem. We got you covered. Thanks to opcode cache, which is standard in PHP 5.5 and which you should be running anyway. When you run an opcode cache, basically it keeps like all the files in memory so that you don't have to like go to disk every time. So even though we're making a ton of PHP includes, they're not really a performance issue because after the first time they're loaded, the next time they're just going to be fetched out of memory. And there are multiple opcode cache, If you're on PHP 5.3, I recommend you use APC, which comes as a PHP module. And if you're on PHP 5.5, you already have a built-in opcode cache, which is called the Zend opcode cache. And as for the tons and tons of CSS and JavaScript files, we employ a plugin called MinQ. And MinQ is basically a plugin that lets you minify JavaScript and CSS. So we have support automatically in this plugin. So any CSS and JavaScript files that you add with your shortcodes, they will all be put together into one single file before they are output onto the page. So essentially this plugin adds only one CSS and one JavaScript file, regardless of how many shortcodes you use it with. All right, let's talk user experience. Visual content builders. Has anyone used visual content builders here? Got a few hands coming up. Okay, so visual content builders, they're kind of like shortcodes on steroids. They generally let you create an interface for creating different what's so-called blocks, which are essentially the same thing as a shortcode. They just some sort of a token that gets replaced by dynamic content. And because because the user doesn't have to type stuff in manually, so like if you have a shortcode, I mean the user needs to know which parameters it takes and how to use it. Visual content builders kind of help you bridge that gap and give the user an interface. Kind of like the custom post types UI and advanced custom fields lets us know what options are available. Visual content builders lets the end user know what kind of options they have available in working with shortcodes. So let's have a little example here. This is the same thing, only in the left tab we are using standard shortcodes. So we have the same shortcodes as we've looked at before, the show authors, which will list all of our authors, and show books, which will list all of our books in the order that you specified. And to the right, we see what that looks like in a visual page builder, in this case, Visual Composer. And I have a little tiny demo film to show you like kind of what the user experience is when you use a drag and drop builder. So here we have, this didn't start from the beginning, so we'll have to wait a little bit until it goes up. Okay, so now we're gonna create our show books block. So we have a bunch of blocks. We select the show books. And here we have the order, like the same configuration as the shortcode had, but we get to actually set it ourselves. So it's very much easier. And there's also drag and drop, so you can drag and drop stuff around any way you please. So as you can see, this is like a little kind of like a better experience for users who want to insert and format the different content. Integrating a shortcode is fairly easy. Like as I said, we're using Visual Composer here, but there's lots of other page builders, and like the process is very similar to this. You just make a little integration to let the content builder, the visual drag and drop builder plugin know that you want to hook into it and extend its functionality. So in the case of Visual Composer, there's the full documentation, and basically the thing that you have to get right is Visual Composer is shortcode based. So you basically put in the name of the shortcode as part of your integration, and then in the params array, you set the variable name from the shortcode. So if we go back and look here at the shortcode, so we have the order equals as ascending, or orders equals ascending. So that's basically the name that you put into the integration to get it to integrate properly. But where do we put this code? Well, why not our shortcodes plugin? So let's unify the whole thing. So this works out nice, since Visual Composer is actually based around shortcodes. So everything is shortcodes, and the interface you see is assembled from the page, which is just a bunch of shortcodes. So we extend our custom shortcodes plugin, and we add a mappings folder. So that's basically what's new. And the mappings are the stuff we just saw a demo of. That's like the custom blocks that you can select from inside the administrative area. And then we have our show authors and show books integrations. And again, just to clarify, what this code does is lets us create the blocks on the right there. It's that integration. And a little bit about the thought process. So data that belongs to our custom post types. So like when we have books, we have the author and the published date of the book. We store that in our custom fields because that's data that belongs to like the custom post type in question, if it's a book, if it's an author. And then stuff that handles how our shortcodes will be displayed, that you put in the actual configuration inside your inside Visual Composer. So we're going to have a concrete example of this with the IDG Event Site, and the goal was to unify the event site creation, because earlier we have a lot of events at IDG and people just make them, you know, in whatever technology they want. So we have like one-off WordPress installations, some used our proprietary CMS, some just hand code everything in HTML. And we wanted to kind of unify that into like, so that everyone runs the same thing, and so simplify the creation of event sites basically. Like the goal was that you could create an event site in 15 minutes. That was like our initial dream goal. And we also want to enable full flexibility for content publishers to use, like, to put stuff where they want it, and like maybe remove something or add something in a way we didn't. So they're not really like that constrained. We don't want to constrain them more than necessary. And we want to have easy maintenance, which is essentially what I've shown you up until now. It's like how you set up a system so that you can easily maintain shortcodes, custom fields, custom post types. So the end results, we have 3 custom post types on our event sites. We have 12 custom field groups, and we have 21 shortcodes. And this is kind of what it looks like on a live site. So you can see there's a lot of shortcodes, and if you open up the CSS and the JavaScript folders, you'll see that each and every one of these also has a CSS and JavaScript file. But as we can see, like, it's still kind of neatly organized. Like, we can pretty easily find like a shortcode. So somebody calls, we have a bug in event list. Well, that's fairly easy to fix. We know exactly where it is, and we know where the associated CSS is, and we know where the associated JavaScript is. So it takes a minute to find. No more searching. All right, let's have a quick demo of the event sites. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is a multi-site installation. So each brand has their own kind of WordPress site on the multi-site, so each brand can have their own events, so to speak. And we can go to the very bottom, where I have created a little WordCamp site. And here's kind of here's the list of events, and I have created actually a little fake page for this event. So if we go into that one, we see here that we have our little event site. And everything you see here is based around shortcodes and drag and drop. So we have the little icons, we have the slider, video, kind of like call to action stuff, galleries, speakers, lists, maps, and like the schedule, and the sponsors, of course. So how does this look on the back end? Oh, we also have this really neat menu, so you can just go. And actually, this one is dynamically generated depending on which blocks you put in, but that's, you can ask me about that if you find that interesting. So let's look at how this event actually looks on the back end. And you'll have to bear with me, we didn't internationalize this to English because this is an internal project, so the most admin stuff is in Swedish. So here you can see that everything is divided up neatly into blocks. So we have, for our title, we have a little block here that's called main section, where you can configure stuff like the title, the size of the text. You can center it if you want to. You can add a menu title in the top menu if you want to, so that when users click in the menu, they scroll to this location. Can go down. So as you can see, everything is based around the shortcode, around like the blocks and shortcodes in the end. So here's this quote slider. So we can go in here. We can see that we can configure like the carousel interval. And here's the speaker list. We can see here that we can configure the amount of speakers that we would like to show. So maybe if we don't want to show 3 per row, we want to show 6 per row. We can save that, update. And then if we open up the event, now the speaker list should be 6 speakers per row. It's a bit down, there we go. So we only have 5 speakers, so there's a little empty white space on the end. So this kind of like shows you like what the thought process that goes into like making a site that is fully based around blocks. So thanks to this, if somebody doesn't want like an image here, they can just remove it. If they would like to move some text, they just move text. They want to insert a new element, they just pick an element from the list. These are all the custom elements that we've built. There's speakers list, quotes, like everything that you've seen is a block here. And we've had some really, really good feedback from the end users. We weren't completely sure if this was like the right way to go or if this was too much freedom, but people actually picked this up very quickly, and they make like a really, really interesting, some stuff is very interesting when they get the possibility to flex their creative freedoms themselves. So if we go back to the, let's see here. Yeah, if we go back to the presentation. This is open source. I just pushed everything yesterday. So the source code for the custom post type manager, for the custom fields manager, and for the shortcodes manager, it's all available on GitHub. So, and we also had like the examples we saw with books and authors. We have those in there as well. So when you install this, you'll get like a books post type and an author's post type, and you can play around a little bit with it. And if you're using Visual Composer, you will also be able to use these as blocks inside Visual Composer. That's also taken care of. So I hope that this talk inspired you into like thinking about how you structure your project, basically, and maybe you saw something that you thought was nice, and maybe you adapt it. Who knows? That's it for me. Thank you.